Hi everyone. Today we are talking about accessibility and how that means we are designing for all people and being super inclusive as we design. So, what is accessibility? It's making sites and apps, and I'm going to use those words interchangeably because it's all things that people visit via the internet, and it's making them available for all. So, this this isn't just making it accessible, it's making it inclusive. 20% of users, and that's all users, say they have some sort of disability. And not every organization is investing in making their websites and apps accessible to everybody. And we get to really fight for these people. Design is always made better when it's made for everyone. When it's made accessible for everyone, it helps everybody. Because if we don't do these specific things, we are eliminating 20% of humanity from accessing our stuff. And that is ridiculous. That's ignoring a huge audience, a huge amount of people. And remember, these design changes we're talking about don't just help people who are totally disabled. They are helping people who are on the fringe, on the edge of disabilities as well. So that means we could be helping close to 30 to 40% of everybody at some point if we really think about it. It's amazing, honestly, the power we have when we make things accessible. And we need to know more about this, so we're going to talk a little bit more. So the types of disability we're talking about today are visual impairment, deaf or hard of hearing, intellectual and cognitive, and physical. So in 1990, the American Disabilities Act was enacted, and this law was finally on the side of 20% of people that really need it, and honestly even more than that, because you can go in and out of disability depending on what illness you have. The truth is, limitation is the end stop for most humans. As we get older, we tend to lose abilities, and elderly people deal with many of these things: visual impairment, deafness, cognitive, physical disability, all of these things. But so do people who are much younger. You know, when I was in my 30s, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and MS is a brain disease where your immune system attacks the transmitters on your nerves in your brain. So that can be everything from, it can affect your vision, it can affect your mobility, it can affect your speech, it can affect cognitive things, and it can affect all things. So when I was in my 30s, I learned how to walk with a cane. I learned how to use screen readers and talk to text, to write papers and reviews. I learned what would work best for me, and that was all because of assistive tech. That's what we get to do. I mean, I highly doubt you know nobody who uses some kind of assistive tech, whether it's a screen reader or something like this. So I included links at the end of on this, at the bottom of this whole like module, where it talks through items that people use, so you can kind of be made aware of all the different things that are available. But visual impairment doesn't have to be just full blindness. It can range from color blindness to blurred vision to total blindness. And that's why screen readers are so important. We'll be talking about them multiple times. I've used those things because my vision gets blurry in one eye. So it gives me a headache to read all the papers and things that I have to read. So short of having my husband read them out loud to me, I have to use something that reads it to me or gives me an ability to grade, you know? So it's interesting because, and that comes and goes. You know, I don't have it now, but I did. So it's interesting because when things come and go like that, it's nice to have the ability to use or not use. And technology has aided people with different disabilities so they can have access to these things and live independent lives. This is super important stuff, guys. So the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the W3C, there's a lot of acronyms here, developed guidelines to make sure everyone can access sites and apps, and that's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, otherwise known as WCAG 2.0. Now, WCAG, it sounds like a cat that's got a hairball, but that's really the guidelines that every web designer uses to make sure that their stuff is accessible. And that can be super detailed. I mean, when you walk through this, when we do website audits for accessibility, I mean, it's 50 pages of checks and making sure everything is working and functional for all people. And there's a huge variety of things that you can employ. We're going to be talking about a few of them that we can use in our class. But the pillars of this set of guidelines are: it must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we'll walk through each one of these and how you see it. So perceivable is making sure the site is perceivable for everybody. That means they can see it, right? So you have alternatives for non-text content, which is called alt text, which is super duper important for screen readers. Color is not the only thing that conveys info or meaning, which we'll show you. Appropriate contrast ratios for content, and no autoplay of audio or video. This is just good design, honestly. No autoplay of audio or video. Have you ever been in a situation where something just automatically plays? It's so obnoxious. It's horrible. People should be in charge of whether or not content autoplays. And especially people who have visual impairments or cognitive, it's really hard when something starts shouting at you from your phone. It's overwhelming. So you have to think about that. This isn't something where people should be in charge of whether or not things play. So I'll show you some different examples of how you can use this in this class. So this is some bad design. So if you look at this, this is what a lot of things look like. So you track my location, it's off, and then I turn track my location on and it turns green. But if you're colorblind, which 8% of men and 1% of women are colorblind, which is a 9%. Think about that. That's a big percentage of people. That's just poor design, because if you look at it to the right, you'll see that all of this looks gray. You have no idea what's on and what's off, and nothing's labeled. A better way to do this is to label things color, icon, and also text, so people can read it. Screen readers can read it. That's the most important thing. But this way, no matter if you're confused by the icon, you have the words and the color to kind of guide you. So no matter what your disability is, there could be a way for you to understand what's going on. So this one's green with a check mark, and this one's blue. But if all of these were gray, you would still understand what's going on. You have to use something other than color as an indicator. This is hard when you are a minimal designer. When you really like minimalism, you feel like it's clutter. But the point is that you can still make it look sleek and good. And the point is, if 20% of people can't use it, can't see it, can't understand it, it's poor design, no matter how it looks to your sensibilities. So we need to think about that. Alt text is another huge thing that perhaps you won't be doing in this class, but you will in your life, because anytime you enter a photo into a browser or any kind of non-text image, you really want to provide alternative text for what's going on. Now, how do you do that? Well, the best way to do it is to describe what is going on in the image as you want them to understand it, which means this is a Bitcoin graph. The worst way to say it is to go through, and this is when you enter into alt text, this is what the screen reader reads. So you would say on June 1st, the value of Bitcoin was $2,100. On June 2nd, the value of Bitcoin. This would go on forever. It would bog down your screen reader. You'd be listening to it forever and never understand truly the meaning of the graph as why it was used. Good alt text shows Bitcoin's value has steadily increased since June 2017, but peaked in December at over 19K each. It sharply dropped in February. That's the purpose. You put that graph on there to show that information, then tell them the purpose. So the other benefit of using alt text effectively is that search engines are more likely to scan through the alt text and index the image correctly. They boost the keyword performance of the page. This is all super important stuff. That's search engine optimization. That's good design. Okay, another thing, I'm going to put my, another thing for this, body copy, if you look at this, I'm going to move my little screen up here. So you really want to aim towards 16 point for body copy. And that's just good for people with any kind of visual impairment, including people over the age of 40, because your vision goes naturally. Some of you might have perfect vision for now, but you'll end up using reading glasses over time. Now, if you make your body copy, especially on mobile, 16 point, you're going to have a much easier time of reading. And it looks bulky at times, but I would shoot for it because that is what matters and that is what works. So it's good design. I mean, you always want to enable zoom. You always want to make sure people can read the stuff, but as you're scanning through text, you really need to make sure the text is readable for everybody, even those maybe who have a visual impairment or just need reading glasses, honestly. It's going to make your content usable. Okay, here's another one. This is line height. You really want to shoot for 1.5, 150% space between lines. That's like not quite double spaced, right? And that's because it's just easier to read. In IMS 254, we talked about how spacing between lines increases communication. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. If you look at the right image, you can see how the leading is tight and it's hard to read. It feels cramped. But on the left, it feels open, airy, easy for your eye to go around each letter and word. It works better. Light text is similar in nature. At small sizes and in general, you must choose dark text. Make sure the contrast is there. If you don't, it's going to be hard to see. And again, this is for the fringes as well. And that's what I mean by that is the people who use reading glasses, who have a hard time making out text like this. I mean, this isn't just for blind people or people with serious visual impairments. This is for people with those fringe visual impairments. You want them to feel comfortable on your app. So make sure your text has contrast. Also, another thing is the space between objects. Now, let's say you wanted to open up this tweet. So you want to click on, the actual tweet itself. Well, likely you would click on the handle instead of the tweet because there's not enough space. So if you have a mobile or physical impairment, it might be hard to choose the right thing to click on. And that is such a shame because you should be aiding for the right click, right? So you really need we talk about target size for click, making sure that each menu item has a space around it. This is no different. So this is poor job by Twitter. Okay, another thing we need to think about is using uppercase text if you are going to use smaller text. So we've talked about before labeling every icon, and that's because you can't always assume that people know what these icons mean. So make sure you are labeling them, absolutely. But after you're done labeling them, the uppercase at a small text size is far easier to read than the lowercase. So uppercase it is. So operable is the next. So assistive tech has to work with your site, and that's everything from screen readers to cheek touch. It doesn't matter. This is Stephen Hawking. He had this amazing chair where he could move his head and touch this cheek pad, and then it would navigate where he wanted to go. If you can't use assistive tech to operate your website or your app, it's worthless. If people can't use the mouth stick that they use to navigate through a site, and people use those who have Parkinson's and who have different debilitating diseases, it's worthless. You have to be able to use those assistive tech. Now, the ability to use a mouse even can degrade over time. So, and using a keyboard to navigate through a site works longer than a mouse. So navigating through form fields can kind of trap this cursor. So one way I always, whenever I'm doing an accessibility test, I always tab through the site. If you use the tab key to select, you could literally test any website you wanted to see if it's accessible and use the tab key, and it should go through a normal, logical view of the website using hierarchy as its guide. That's how it should be developed. But some people don't think about that. So when you use the tab key, you can get trapped in form fields. you can get stuck in all different places, and it's such a bummer because this is how so many people navigate through a website using the tab key. So also on this note, the WCAG guidelines tell us to stay away from flashing lights to prevent against seizures. Also, to stay away from the color yellow. Not necessarily in buttons, but like large amounts of yellow, like whole screens full of yellow. It's really agitates people who are on the autism spectrum. Plus, it's hard for your eyes to read. It gets really, really tiring. And again, this is a great example of just good design for all. If your eyes get tired with huge swaths of yellow on mobile apps and such, like, why use it? Why not make it so your eyes are energized and relaxed and comfortable? And if it agitates people on the autism spectrum, don't use it. Okay, the next pillar is understandable. So no matter your content, anyone must be able to figure out how to use it. So you have to really write your website content to a 9th grade level. So, and that means you avoid using unusual words, jargon, abbreviations, because this leaves people out and you want everyone to access it. This is especially important for cognitive disabilities. And this is why UX just isn't a design job, but research is necessary. You really have to understand these things to be able to understand how important they are. A 9th grade reading level is sometimes hard to judge, but essentially it's 2 to 3 sentences for paragraphs without uncommon words. You know, Hemingway wrote his books at a 4th grade reading level. Do you know that? He's one of the most celebrated authors of all time, and he wrote to a 4th grade reading level, and they were excellent. He writes in an understandable range. So there's this thing called HemingwayApp.com that helps you write to a correct level. So if you're ever confused about that, if you really want to make sure you're doing that, look up that. I have a link to it on the module. But so like, for instance, children need good schools if they're going to learn properly, versus high quality learning environments are a necessary precondition for facilitation and enhancement of the ongoing learning process. Obviously, that is overwhelming. And why not just say children need good schools if they're going to learn properly, right? That's the difference. Can you make it understandable so that the world can get what you're saying? And you know what? Not only that, this is a side note. There are plenty of people who are reading websites and apps where English is not their primary language, you know? So let's write so that the world can understand, even if they have a less robust understanding of English. That's important. You're enabling the world to grasp what we're trying to say. Don't you understand how this accessibility is actually empowerment for everybody? It's incredible. I'm excited about it. Okay, so another part of this understandable part of these guidelines is having visual indicators that help people understand what's missing on form fields. This is such a good, Twitter does a really great job of this. If it's correct, now it's in green, but it also has a check mark, but it also says that it looks great. So it allows people to understand, I have filled out this form correctly. And if something is wrong, it'll say, passwords do not match, red X, no. Username is taken, try again. So it tells you what the error is rather than just saying error. I mean, you're enabling people to do things faster, to understand what the problem is. How many times are we filling out these exact fields, totally multitasking, not thinking about it, completely, like distracted, and you do the wrong password. And then you don't realize why the password doesn't match or what's not working. Or for instance, how about this? How many of you left out dashes in your phone number or didn't put the area code in its own box, And you're like, why would they do that? And they don't tell you the error. This is the thing. We need to make it operable. We need to understand why the thing is wrong. And this, again, we're empowering people to do work quicker, to access all things, and to do things right. Another great system could be enacting a help system. And that could be, if someone is lost, they can click on help and figure out where to go next. So here's another thing that this is super important for this class, because you'll have form fields in this class. I mean, whenever you're filling out a sign in or sign up thing, you're going to have form fields. You should always have label forms above each little field. So like name and then the field. So minimal design, typically people just put the name within the block and then you click on the block, but what goes away when you click on the block? What is supposed to go there? So name disappears and all of a sudden you're supposed to remember what went there. And that is frustrating. So screen readers don't read that placeholder text that exists within the form fields. So let's say somebody with a visual impairment is looking at this form, they have no concept what goes first because the screen reader can't read it. So you absolutely must put the label of each form field over the form field because the screen reader will logically say name, and then that's where you fill it in. So you have to enable people to know what to do next. That seems obvious, but like you have to think about it with that perspective. Okay, the next pillar is robust. That means all users can use your site, and that has to be changing with new tech that comes out. So like we've talked about, screen readers are super, super popular. Every user agent or screen reader or web browser should function within your site. Screen readers have to work with your site, otherwise you're missing out on your audience. And the way screen readers work is they work from top to bottom in a linear fashion. They do not scan. So it's not like we do when we go to a website and we're like jumping around and scanning to see where we're going. Screen readers go top and they literally do the hierarchical like reading throughout. So the site must guide them through the page so a screen reader doesn't lose the point of the page. So for instance, does the first sentence or two from every paragraph on your page, your website, make sense if it's read out of context? It should, because that's just good writing, but we need to make sure that it does. This is like little things that we don't always think about, but are super important. So in conclusion, accessible design is good design. When you design to include everyone, it benefits everyone. We cannot get lazy. We cannot forget to look for the 20%. We need to fight for them. We need to fight for that, honestly, including the fringe, 30 to 40% that need us to design this well. Guys, we can empower people through design. And that is awesome. I mean, I'm excited about it. All right, now read the rest of the page because there's a lot of good things on there about accessibility.